Hey everyone, this is Elon from the Eggard podcast. I'm here with my buddy Josh, who's also a Leo law enforcement officer. For those of you who don't know what a Leo is, and there's so much to talk about. There's a ton to talk about, but I think there's two things that are really relevant. Obviously, the Chauvin trial, and then the Makiah Bryant case that just happened. So I think we should just start with that, just because of time constraints.
Okay.
And so you saw what happened, right, with the Makiah Bryant?
Correct.
Do you want to just run it down, give everyone a recap, and kind of give your thoughts on it?
Um, the real fast version is cops get sent to a report of a fight in progress. They get there and they see a girl with a knife in her hand and literally about to plunge it into one of the people involved in that fight, and they take action, justified action. They are allowed to take a life to save a life. That is absolutely part of their oath. And at that point in time, I don't think anybody, given the circumstances, if they watch that video, would think that they would think anything otherwise. She wasn't holding that knife in her hand for fun
No,
purposes.
it's in the motion of,
Yeah, 100%.
and she had already stabbed somebody.
100%.
So there's
Yep.
the intent to stab, the intent to harm or with the knife. Never mind was questionable. It had already been done.
Correct.
So
Correct.
for a fact, if someone's willing to stab someone and they're already going to swing at someone else, their goal is to stab that other person. It wasn't even a small knife. It was a knife.
Correct.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked for a lot of reasons. I'm shocked on how this was initially reported.
Initially, it's still being reported. At any other time, this would be the headline, or the headline should be, police officer saves woman from being stabbed. And it's interesting, and I don't want to say for sure because it's possible that it's out there and I just haven't seen it. Honestly, because I try to follow as little of the news as possible to keep myself from throwing up. I haven't seen any statements really, certainly any strong statements coming out from the family of the girl who was saved, or the girl herself who was saved. And again, I don't want to say that they're not out there. They very well may have released a statement, and I just haven't seen it yet. But I can tell you right now that even if that statement is out there, it's not being well advertised. So that's not an accident. Again, we talk about, on pretty much every time we talk about, the media's clear bias at this point, and what you're saying is 100% accurate. The headlines are just atrocious. They're just atrocious.
Well, you know what's most shocking to me? There's multiple things, but the first thing that happened was the way it was reported was, and people are posting this on Instagram and Facebook, justice for Makiah Bryant. It's like a whole movement now. They've been rioting. And so I asked my friends, do you know what happened? And they're like, yeah, this poor girl, this poor child was being bullied. She called the cops, and then the cops came and shot her. And I'm like, you do realize that she stabbed somebody. She was trying to stab somebody else. They're like, I don't know any of that. I don't know about that. And I'm like, just look at the facts. So then they did look at the facts, and their follow-up response was, it doesn't matter if she had a knife. They could have shot her in the leg. They could have tased her. They could have done. I'm like, if that's your child,
Yep,
that is being charged at by a stranger with a big knife to stab her in the head.
Yep.
The solution is not to tase them. That won't stop them in time. People don't realize what a knife is. A knife in close quarters is more dangerous than a gun.
They realize. They trust me. They realize it is. There's craziness going on right now. And I guess I don't want to jump ahead. But there's craziness going on right now. One of my friends works for state corrections, and her and her partner. She's white, he's black, and she loves the conversations that they have because they have honest, even if it turns to arguments, there's a respect there. We talk about it all the time. We have to be able to agree to disagree at some point. Disagreement is at the core of democracy. We have to be able to have differing opinions. So she values those conversations that she has with him, and they were talking about the Chauvin trial specifically, and the influence that the Maxine Waters and all the other stuff that's going on around it, and basically how that jury knew that if they came back with anything not guilty on anything, that building was burning down with them in it. And if anybody thinks that didn't have a play in the outcome, regardless of whether you feel he's guilty, not guilty. That push that aside. If anybody thinks that those other influences,
what do you mean? The president of the United States saying that
no,
he expects a verdict is going to have an impact, or are senators coming out and calling for violence if they don't get the
literally? I mean, imagine, put yourself in the position of the people in that jury room. I mean, they have to be sitting there like, yo, I don't care what it is. Josh. Yeah, we'll circle back, but I mean, that is and don't skip over what I did there with the circle back, please. We'll circle back to that, but yeah, there's crazy stuff going on. So she had said, you know, with that, he goes, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, you know, it's not that I agree with it or disagree with it, but I'm just telling you right now that the streets, the community is saying, well, if cops, if and when they say cops, it's interesting dynamic too, and which we can also get to. They say, you know, cops feel like they're being targeted, and honestly, the community that's out there says, well, now you know what that's like. She's like, it's the most fucked up thing I've ever heard. Like, wait, what? What do you mean now we know what it's like? And I think it's starting this trend. You know, you see, I mean, when people say police officer now, the media has it so focused right now that anytime anybody says police officer, instantly it's a white male. Instantly. Mm-hmm. That's people's default. You know, we over the weekend got into a dust up with the mayor from Fair Lawn, New Jersey, Kurt Peloso. His wife had posted something. It came down to splitting hairs. It came out on the line of duty death anniversary of Marianne Calora, who was not only Fair Lawn's first line of duty death, she was Fair Lawn's first female police officer. She was killed on April 17th, 2003. And his wife, the mayor's wife, had put a couple of anti-law enforcement posts on the day. They showed up on the day. I have to make sure that I correct it right, because I want to give the gentleman his due there, because he did reach out to not debate anything that was said, not condemn his wife's statements. He just reached out to correct the timing of his wife's post. But one of the posts that his wife made had said, before they were racists with badges and guns, and then went on to talk about how that it's taught in schools. So my question is, who's they? Because she's saying before they were racist with badges and guns. Last time I checked, police officers are all races, all genders, all religions. There's a lot of everything inside of law enforcement. So who exactly is the they she's talking about? And it's funny, her sister is a police officer in Asbury, New Jersey, who subsequently, by the way, marched in full uniform with BLM, but that's a separate issue.
Well, you know what, though? I mean, I'm going to say this. I mean, again, the entire position of the left in general now is that police are systemically racist, that there's white supremacy within the police force. It needs absolute reform. I want to jump into all that. I just want to read you two responses to the Makiah Bryant stabbing, the attempted stabbing and shooting of her, that even when the evidence is presented, how far the narrative will go. And so these are verified accounts. One of them is a Black Lives Matter person. I'm going to keep it not putting, I mean, it's public on Twitter. It doesn't matter. But teenagers have been having fights, including fights involving knives, for eons. We do not need police to address these situations by showing up to the scene and using against one of the teenagers. Y'all need help. I mean that seriously. Defund and abolish the police. And then the next one. And I've seen a ton of these, a ton. I mean, this is flooding my newsfeed. Politicians have come out and listen to what Nancy Pelosi's comments on George Floyd sacrificing his life. Anyway, this one's great in terms of being actually insane. A Black teenage girl named Makiah Bryant was killed because a police officer immediately decided to shoot her multiple times in order to break up a knife fight. Demand accountability, fight for justice. Black Lives Matter. She's actually saying what happened and actually thinks that she's recounting the events. An officer shot somebody in a knife fight, and it wasn't even a knife fight. It was one person with a knife trying to stab someone who did not have a knife. That's not a knife fight. That's assault with a deadly weapon. Attempted homicide. That's attempted murder. It's attempted murder. Yeah. That's literally. But she's saying it, and she's like, we need justice. It's become, so you were talking, this is why I wanted to circle back. I'm sorry I cut you off earlier.
No, that's all right. No, keep going.
This verdict was Chauvin, regardless of how you feel about it.
Yep.
again, because for me, it was manslaughter was what I was expecting. I don't even see how murder 3 is on the table. Neither did the judge, because that means you're blindly shooting into a crowd with intent to harm, but no one specific. Murder 2, you have to show up with the intent to commit a felony. So he had to have known he was going there to commit a felony. And then, so those 2 charges don't make sense to me. I'm not on the jury. I don't care. But what we have done for sure, I care because I want justice upheld. But in terms of like, I'm not going to sit here and debate with someone who agrees with me that it made no sense. I think to most people who look at the evidence can rationally analyze it and can be objective. Murder 2 and murder 3 made no sense, and that the jury was corrupted. So what, in terms of just being scared, in terms of just having to give a verdict, in terms of it representing all of systemic racism and all this stuff. But what it did, 2 things. It set up a precedent now where they can, now we all agree police are systemically racism, need reform, police are evil. That very thing that you said, it was the mayor's wife said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the president's saying stuff that's very similar. Our vice president, Kamala Harris, is saying things that are very similar. Keith Ellison compared George Floyd to Emmett Till. I mean, so this rhetoric that's coming from her has permeated all of politics, all of the left. It's the new standard. So I thought like if they found him guilty, they would say, okay, the system works. Police are being held accountable. We can move forward. No, they're using it as a starting point.
Yes. Oh yeah, they've even said it. They said that this verdict, the justice for George Floyd is not the point.
No, it's
now we need to continue. Now the floodgates are open. Well, you finish first, and then I'll say.
Well, no, but that's why the Makiah case is so relevant, because it's the closest thing to it. And you already see that in a situation where someone had already stabbed somebody. I just want people listening to this to listen to what took place. There's someone with a knife. They stab somebody, which can easily kill them. They then go to stab another person. This is considered a mass stabbing at this point. That is 2 people. And an officer shows up on the scene, and to prevent a second person from potentially being stabbed to death in the face, shoots the person who has the knife, according to all training is proper, all, I would imagine, all the rules and regulations.
Yeah, you are empowered to take a life to save a life. That is absolutely one of the reasons to shoot somebody. 100%.
And yet the overwhelming majority in terms of media, in terms of politicians on the left, in terms of Hollywood, in terms of, have already used this as an event to cause more rioting, to cause more violence, and to cause more systemic racism of police.
King LeBron James couldn't wait. He couldn't wait. The almighty LeBron James put up a picture of the police officer involved and hashtagged it. Or no, he didn't hashtag it. He just said, "You're next," with a little hourglass, and then hashtagged accountability.
What does that even mean?
I'll tell you what it means. This is and this is my only issue with the Chauvin trial and the standard that it set. Because again, like you had said, the jury absolutely was corrupted. Anybody that thinks otherwise, I just stop. I don't even the details of the case itself have been talked to death. I mean, like we could, we've been over it, and everybody has their opinion on what went down that day, and that's never going to change. What you saw with the jury is very important, and set it, like you had said, it set a precedence. But the precedence that I'm looking at is now the precedence of giving the mob their way. Mm-hmm. You basically told these thugs and people like Maxine Waters and all these stars that are tweeting this reckless stuff, they're thugs. They're thugs. And you gave the thugs their way. You told them that, you showed them firsthand that if you are willing to burn enough to make outlandish threats, you'll get your way. So now it's, look at all these other officers that are still waiting and standing trial. They're screwed.
Any officer right now on trial is screwed.
My go-to has always been, it's the one that I harp on the most, because to me, again, I had said it's in more recent history where this started is Aaron Dean in Fort Worth. I mean, everybody just research that case. I keep telling everybody, this started it. The fact that Aaron Dean is awaiting trial for murder is absurd. It's insane. What happened with Aaron Dean was an absolute tragedy, without question. Because everybody's like, oh, well, what would you have wanted her to do? No, you know what? She took the course of action that probably every grown adult would have had, but and was met with that reasonable reaction by Aaron Dean, and he is facing murder. I mean, I know we've talked about before.
Run people down with the details of the case.
I was just gonna say I'll be quick with it too, because I'm very into it. I don't want to talk too long on it. The short of it is, call comes in between 1 and 2 in the morning from a neighbor. Says there's an open door at my neighbor's house, doesn't look right. Again, who knows neighbors better than neighbors? If you know when something's not right with your neighbor's house, something's off, because you see it every day. So who better to know that something's weird than a neighbor? Okay, so already going there as a police officer, you're thinking to yourself, something ain't right. If the neighbor's calling me, something's not right. So is this a medical thing? What? You're already in your head. His body camera's on, and you can see it on his body camera. He walks up to the front door, doesn't announce himself, which was one of the big contentions, because, I guess apparently police officers are supposed to announce themselves to burglars. I don't know. I never read that anywhere. Maybe I was never taught that. Maybe that's in somebody's training guide that I've never seen. So he goes to the front door, he being Aaron Dean, goes to the front door, peeks in, and you could see on his body camera, the house looks like it was hit by a bomb. There's stuff everywhere. Not at all what you would define as a neatly kept house. So now in his head, open door, 2:00 in the morning, house looks like it's been ransacked. This is a burglary, potentially still in progress, because he hasn't even gone in. Fort Worth's own general order, for anybody that needs to know, 327.05 is Fort Worth's general order, says that any open door will be treated as a silent alarm, and the officer's first obligation is to search the exterior of the building for avenues of escape before searching the interior. So what does Aaron Dean do? He peeks in, sees it, thinks to himself, this has got to be a burglary, backs out, obviously guns drawn, flashlight, and now he starts to go around the side of the house. Homeowner inside with her 11-year-old nephew or niece, because, every 11-year-old is up at 2:00 in the morning. And listen, judge free. She probably did what, most grown adults have done at one point in time in their life. You come home from a nice night out or whatever, and, you're drunk or whatever you're doing. And so what do you do? What's more fun to do? Screw with one of your family members who's peacefully sleeping and wants nothing to do with you at all, but it's funny for you. It's 2:00 in the morning. Let's wake him up and mess with him. So he goes, he's searching. She sees outside a flashlight in her yard. Legal gun owner grabs her gun. And she is now standing by the bedroom window with her gun, tracking this flashlight. Aaron Dean comes around the corner, and he's met by somebody standing at the window pointing a gun, and he lets rounds go and kills her.
That's a tragedy.
That is 100% a tragedy. She did nothing wrong. She did what every homeowner in their right mind would have done. I probably would have gone outside and chased the light. I probably would have been more reckless, but she did what every homeowner would have done, was within her rights to do that. But at the same time, a uniformed police officer, in the performance of his duty, responding to a call that he was sent to, not a house that he just targeted, a call that he was sent to, in compliance with tactics, in compliance with law, and in compliance with his own department's general orders, shot somebody who was pointing a gun at him, and he's being tried as a murderer right now.
Yeah.
He's screwed. And he's screwed.
He's screwed. Yeah, there's no way that's going to be. Look, I mean, in the end of the day, no officer moving forward is going to be able to have a rational jury. I mean, at this point.
At all.
And so it's also gotten to the point where, okay, so in that case, that is actually legitimately a tragic event, a series of events that went wrong on multiple fronts in terms of just escalating to a situation that was in the middle of the night, dark, and two people met each other with a gun and opened fire.
And it's as obviously tragic, again, as the shooting of the 16-year-old girl. It is tragic.
But I would argue, actually, see, so in that case with the 16-year-old girl, he actually even it's gone to the point where if we're stopping police officers from saving people's lives,
yes,
I mean, that's a whole different category here. Like, I actually understand entirely what you're saying with the situation with Aaron Dean.
Yeah.
And I find it tragic. In this case, I actually look at the police officer like I mean, this is going to get me a lot of backlash, but I'm like, an
Yeah.
officer who shoots somebody who's trying to actively stab people is a hero.
Yeah.
He's someone who saved someone's lives. I don't know if he's a hero, but he
Well, no,
saved.
he absolutely no, he listen, he absolutely is. That I don't think that's a question. I mean, and to the family of the girl that was about to be stabbed, he should be. And
That's
shame
for
on
me.
them
If
if
that's my baby girl, he saved my baby girl. He's a hero.
shame on them for that. But no, the tragedy comes from the point that she's 16 years old. She's a kid. I mean,
That
and
is tragic.
the judgment,
Absolutely
and
tragic.
you
And
even used the 13-year-old boy in Ohio that was shot.
tragic.
It's tragic. It's tragic. But the thing that nobody wants to address is why was a 13-year-old, actually a 13-year-old gang member whose street name was Lil Homicide. Why was a 13-year-old out at 2:00 in the morning with 21-year-olds pulling rounds off out of a gun?
That's the real. So look, it's when I say
Nobody wants to talk about that.
Well, it all connects.
They want to worry about the 10 milliseconds between the time that he threw the gun and the officer shot him. That's what they want to focus on. They don't want to focus on what Lil Homicide was doing on the street at 2:00 in the morning, throwing rounds up into the air. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Honestly, that is not a failure of the police. The 10 milliseconds, first of all, there's no way. It's so quick.
Yep.
And the guy had already shot rounds. He had a gun. The
Yep.
kid. I mean, again, it's tragic, but it's not a failure of the police. It's a failure of society to raise kids properly, fatherless homes, gang violence, not doing enough in the education system, community outreach, everything to not let kids get to that point.
Yep.
And you know what bothers me about all these things? We're martyring these people. I talked about this previously on another podcast, but here's the reality. Had that Makiah girl stabbed and killed those two people, which was a very realistic outcome had the police not intervened, number one, we would not be hearing about it. It happens all the time.
Yep.
Right? That type of crime is rampant and pervasive comparatively to any type of police shooting, never mind unarmed, compliant people being killed, like in the situation of Aaron Dean that you explained. That is an anomalous case. These type of things with like stabbings and shootings in inner city neighborhoods are exceptionally common. I know because I lived in some rough neighborhoods and there were shootings. They were not that uncommon. They happened. I lived in Carson in California, which was a very rough neighborhood. I lived in Spanish Harlem. These neighborhoods had shootings and killings more often than one would think. And so it's happening not from police, and it never gets media attention. Right? She could have killed those two people. No one would know her name. No one would know the victims' names. And if the police actually showed up and didn't do something and they were stabbed, the police would still be vilified as why didn't you take action?
Yep.
So we've created an impossible precedent. It's impossible.
You didn't show up fast enough because you knew this was a black neighborhood and you anticipated that there were black people involved and you didn't care to get here fast enough to stop it. That would be the narrative that they would put out then. No, it is right now, it is nearly impossible. I mean, I literally laughed when NYPD put out their latest application for her to take their test. I love NYPD. I mean, NYPD is, one of the most storied police departments in this country, if not the most storied. But the laughing was at anybody who would even consider being a police officer now. Go be a fireman right now. Everybody loves firemen. Go be a fireman right now. Because
you'd be surprised. First responders and firemen are also. I interviewed one, and he actually was targeted because they weren't sure if he was a police officer. They have to wear bulletproof vests now.
That's crazy.
Everything. They get accused of racism.
It's crazy. And you're right with the kids. It's not even the kids. I mean, it's just adults in general. They are being taught, they are being bred to believe that it's okay to, disregard a police officer's orders. It's okay to, even to the point of agitate the situation between you and a cop. And you don't have the legal right to resist arrest. You don't have a legal right to resist lawful orders. And they're being told that they do. So they automatically are escalating things that don't need to be escalated. We had talked about it with the Army lieutenant that was stopped. They're escalating. Everybody wants you to believe he was so nervous and he was so scared, like it was, the first time he was ever stopped in the past, which now we know was not the case. Like he was so scared, but he had the time to calmly set his camera up and made sure that his camera had the right angle, and he wasn't shaking, he wasn't breathing heavy. We've all seen somebody that's nervous and stressed, and you can see that heavy breathing when they're nervous. As much as they try to control it, they can't. He wasn't nervous.
By the end, it escalated to the point of him getting nervous.
Yes. Well, yeah, he got nervous when he got pepper sprayed. But no, his goal was to not comply, to antagonize the situation, and to get on video whatever was going to follow. Well, listen, if like the saying goes, if you're going to play stupid games, you're going to get stupid prizes. And yeah, I mean, listen, do police officers make errors? 100%. Sheriff Clark always used to say, as long as police officers are human, you will never have perfection. You'll always be dealing with the human element. That will be a part of law enforcement as long as police officers are humans. So I'm not going to sit here and say that they're infallible, but we have just completely lost our way when it comes to defining what is an error, and what is just the emotion of a family whose family member was into some shit they shouldn't have been into. Sometimes that's just the case. But the whole defund, that thing makes me insane. Without law enforcement, there is no America, and America ceases to be America. The land itself may still be here, but it ceases to be the America that we know.
Well, with our current administration, with the current rhetoric, with the way police now are being, again, if police cannot take action when someone is actively stabbing someone, there will not be police in the future. If those police are being vilified, if the cop who shoots somebody, who's stabbing somebody, is now being vilified, and we're being told, why didn't he do something to save everyone? I mean, once we get to that point and that he should be in jail, if anything happens to this cop, if God forbid this officer goes to jail or does anything, you will not, never mind abolish. They don't need to abolish the police. The police will just stop doing their job. They'll just say, okay, I'm not going to intervene anymore because I'll be put in jail. And the end result will be tons of bodies filling up the street from gang violence, from stabbings, from all these things, because it's proven whenever you do not have police present and policing and doing their job, homicides skyrocket.
Yep.
So that's what we're setting up.
We're going
we're creating.
Joe Rogan had Nancy Pans on. She's a Cal State Fullerton professor and a police psychologist. That's her specialty. And they were talking about all of these. They covered this topic, and they were talking about that whole defund movement. And that's what Joe Rogan had. He had said the same thing. He goes, nobody has a plan. You hear all these defund advocates. Nobody really has a plan for what happens after. He goes, well, I'm going to tell you what happens after. You're going to get like you get in some of these third world countries where the cartels and the gangs and the criminals have more power than the police. And all these idiot kids that are marching around praying for the defund and the abolish of law enforcement, you don't think they're going to prey on you? You're their first targets. What do you think? All of a sudden, they're going to abolish the police and everybody's just going to live in harmony in this imaginary utopian society? Oh, these criminals are coming after you next. This is just, we're just in the way right now.
Well, the thin blue line, man. But it's mass brainwashing. I mean, I open up my phone and I go on Instagram and I see everyone posting BLM and like George Floyd with angel wings and saying he's in heaven looking down on us. The guy, all things aside, again, I don't think he deserved to die that day. I think that Chauvin could have done more to save his life along the way. Definitely, especially when he showed up to the car, he's like already in cardiac arrest and saying, I can't breathe. I don't want to get, like we said, we're not going to start getting into the details. But the guy had previously put a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying, again, that's no justification for anything that happened that day. I'm not talking about that day. Right. But the guy, why are you saying he's in heaven with angel wings and that he sacrificed his life for justice? He had a lifetime of crime, a lifetime of drug abuse, a lifetime of fentanyl, and it led to a series of events where he already had arteriosclerosis. He was already probably in cardiac arrest. He was already overdosing on drugs. And then things escalated from that point forward. There wasn't some grand sacrifice, not to put down George Floyd's the circumstances or everything that happened.
Well, a loss of life is a loss of life, and his
But
loss to his family, to his friend. Sure, it's absolutely a loss to them, and you're right. It's not to diminish, that absence and that loss for them.
no,
But
he's not a martyr.
Candace Owens talks about this all the time. Obviously, way more eloquently than I could. And she talks about just what you said. She goes, "That is what she feels, and she can, as part of the Black community, it's coming from, a Black person's perspective." And she says, that our community always seems to martyr, some of the worst people. These are not civil rights advocates. These are not people fighting for their communities. No, these are criminals. These are criminals, and again, like Sheriff Clark says, these are criminals engaged in criminal behavior that contributed to the circumstances that led to their death.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can debate that. Nobody can. It's not racial. It's not racial. They want it to be so badly. They want it to be so badly because Al Sharpton isn't Al Sharpton if there's no hate.
Mm-hmm.
Al Sharpton isn't the Reverend Al Sharpton owing $14 million in back taxes and getting that shit off if there's no hate. So they need hate to exist. There's a lot of money in hate and there's a lot of power in division. Those are the real issues. So they need this to be a race thing. It's not a race thing. Like I said, you even use the George Floyd as an example. They showed up at the store owner, gave him the bill, and said, yeah, the guy driving that Mercedes is the guy. It wasn't like these cops targeted George Floyd because he was Black. It wasn't like the other two occupants of the vehicle who were Black were treated like shit or thrown up against a wall. One of the guys, as it turns out, the other occupant of the car was the guy that gave the other two fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
The same fentanyl that he saw. So chances
arguably he's responsible for his death. Arguably.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying like these officers that showed up, you could see it. They spoke respectfully to people, didn't throw them up against the wall, didn't search them, even when they were pulling, I don't have any ID or a card. Because, everybody that's 30, 35 years old has no ID on them at all. No debit card, nothing with their name on them. You know who doesn't have any kind of thing with their name on it? People who are wanted. Perps. That's who doesn't have IDs on them. If you're 35 years old and you don't even have a debit card on you, nothing with your name on it, there's a reason. That's not an accident. So even at that point, these officers treated those people with respect. You have the body cam footage. You could hear they weren't talked disrespectfully to. They weren't harassed. They weren't yelled at. They weren't searched. Even when they said, yeah, I got no ID. He just gave me a ride. And the woman is like, yeah, he's my ex-boyfriend. He's out of his mind. He's crazy. He's got a drug problem, this and that. There was no negative interaction here. So if these cops were, white supremacist, racist, they'd be all over everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that disrespect would have been, clear from the beginning, but again, all of these cases, just like the one again with the girl, 16 years old, knife in her hand, that's not racial. That's got nothing to do with race other than the fact that the cop was white and the girl was Black. There's no race involved in that.
No, I know. It's an obsession that our country now has.
Yes.
And the Chauvin result is just going to perpetuate it to the point of, again, I think this is the point I just wanted to hammer in today, is that at this point, an officer could show up at someone's house with a guy holding a family hostage with a knife to someone's neck. And the officer could shoot the guy who has the knife to someone's neck. And if the guy was Black and the family was white and the officer was white, they would make it a racial issue and say, why did he have to shoot him? He could have done something else. He could have tased him. I'm not even exaggerating, because we literally just had that. We literally had someone who had already, even worse, had already stabbed somebody who was actively trying to stab somebody else in the act. That's even worse than the situation I just described. And all I see is justice for Makiah. Yeah, justice, because her parents failed her and let a 15-year-old girl get to the point where she's going out with a knife to stab people. Yep. That's not the cops' fault. That's her parents and her family's fault.
I got a lot of good people around me between the charity, my job, and all that. There's a lot of good people, a lot of years of law enforcement experience, from different communities. One of which is the guy that runs the Blue Magazine, Danny DeValle. He's retired now. And his feeling on what's going on, his assessment, especially now, not just from his career in law enforcement, but now having run the magazine and interviewed people from all over the country and had access to those people, and so he's embedded in this right now. His feeling right now, and to use his words bluntly, is that law enforcement, police officers right now need to calm the fuck down. Because nobody right now, like you were saying, nobody is on a police officer's side right now. The politicians aren't with us. The people that the community are allowing to represent them, either by putting them out there or by their silence, by not standing up to them. The people that are speaking for the community right now are against us. Our administration, while they might not be vocally against us per se, they're not going to hesitate to feed us to the mob, especially if it comes down to self-preservation. You saw it with the Aaron Dean thing specifically. I mean, that chief, before the body camera footage was even out, was giving press conferences saying that even if Aaron Dean is not arrested and charged, we're firing him anyway. So he was saying that's his own chief.
That's an admittance of guilt from his own chief. Yeah.
It's insane. So as police officers, you use the Brooklyn, Minnesota incident. You're 10 miles away from where George Floyd died, in the middle of the George Floyd trial, and you're stopping cars for expired registrations. This is not Monday morning quarterbacking, and this is not trying to question other cops. It's like, we always say, well, listen, cops, we're family. Law enforcement is a family, and if we're family, well, I'm going to talk to you like family. And sometimes you need to check your family a little bit. Why are you stopping cars for expired registrations? I mean, listen, every police department in the Minnesota area, certainly in the area of where George Floyd died, every police department has to just be strapped, working, I'm sure, over mandatory overtime. Anybody was a house mouse or is working somewhere in headquarters, everybody's in uniform now, because they probably need everybody they got to be out and to deal with these protests and deal with. So everybody is strapped. Everybody's stressed out. You're in, literally ground zero of this right now. Why are you stopping cars for expired registration? Why are you hard charging now, especially knowing, okay, so now look where it ends up. Look at the situation that ends up happening. Yeah, the guy ends up having, you run the guy's name. Now he has this warrant, and he's a violent guy to begin with. Now he resists, and let him go. Let him go. He's getting back in the car to go. Let him go. You know who he is. You're going to catch him again anyway. But now to get yourself in that position where you're going to use any kind of force right now, knowing the climate that it's in, I mean, listen, cops signed up for a job. They absolutely signed up for a job, and the people that they swore that oath to, and the employers that they swore that oath to, and the community that they swore that oath to, is not the same community as we have today. It's drastically changed, and you are 100% right. This latest, if anything happens to that police officer,
game over.
I mean, yeah, I honestly, I think at that point, anything short of a full exoneration with almost an apology, it's game over. I mean, I know every generation, and I'm sure any cop, especially the older cops, will laugh. Every generation of police officer has heard, the job's dead, kid. The job's dead. Because again, law enforcement, it's evolving. It's always changing. The job will never be the same. The job that I come on to is not going to be the same when I retire as it was when I came on. So the job is always changing, and there's always little comforts, inside of that job that a cop enjoyed or whatever that are now gone. And so for that, they feel like, the job's ending. This is it, and now this generation, I think the job's dead. I really think it's dead. I mean, it is, because again, when we're to a point, and I've used the example of the protests in the city, where you're listening to the units that are flanking these marches, and these people are breaking business windows. The officers are right there. they have to be seeing what's going on. They I'm sure can easily identify who's doing what, and they're not taking callers. They're just calling, yeah, send a precinct unit, 182 7th Avenue, just had windows broken. Send somebody to take a report. They're not taking callers. So when you're at a point to where law enforcement, I don't care how petty the crime is in the moment, obviously, is it worth jumping into a crowd of 1,000 people to try to lock somebody up that just broke a window? When, no, you're probably going to get same thing like we just talked about, to calm the fuck down like that. No, it's not worth it at that point. But that's very telling, where we're to a point that law enforcement is actually witnessing crime and not affecting arrests. How do you get that back? The job's dead.
The job's dead, especially with
I think so.
With the entire narrative and the entire administration. It's every institution is against police.
Yes.
There's none that are pro police. I mean, you open up any app on your phone and the first thing you see is BLM. If you open up TikTok, BLM. If you open up Instagram, BLM. You open up Amazon, BLM. You open up Prime, Amazon Prime to watch movies, BLM. You open up Netflix, BLM. Everywhere. It's everywhere. And I'm not saying even this as a criticism of BLM, but, the leaders of BLM openly called for riots during this if they didn't get the verdict they wanted. They've called to defund the police. So that's who has the power. It's game over. I want to end on this note. We just had a girl who stabbed somebody, actively tried to stab someone else. A police officer stopped her from killing someone. And he is the villain and she is the hero. There are now riots for her. There is a justice movement for her. She is the face now, the new face after George Floyd of the movement. That is where we're at.
Yes.
Let that sink in. If put yourself in a police officer's position and let that sink in and ask yourself, how much longer are we going to have police for? So I hope that if something does happen to that police officer or the next one, that we start speaking up, because it's our duty. It's not the police's duty at this point to speak up. It's our duty to start countering these movements. All of the people watching, it starts being our burden. If you want to live in a future where we have police who do their job, who stop criminals, I don't care what color you are. I don't care where you're from. If that's the future you want to live in, you're going to have to start speaking up. That's it. Bottom line.